what happens. We'll see. So last week we introduced what will be several sessions of our seminar talking about conflict resolution. And we started in kind of an unusual place, taking 1 Corinthians 12 and looking at the conflict inside the Corinthian church, and then Paul telling them, this is how you become mature. It's not about having spiritual gifts. It's not about what your specific role is, but you become complete and you become mature and you become perfected with love. And then the rules of engagement are what love doesn't do and what love does do. If you superimpose that, if you just simply had that in the back of your mind or on your fridge and you started in a conflict and went, I can't be rude, I can't be selfish, I can't be bringing up the old things in the past. The rules of engagement for conflict is that description of love in 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 8. I heard a guy named Matt Evans, he's not a member of our church, talk about that particular section of Scripture. He said you take everything in those 15 descriptions of love, you could put them under one of three categories: endurance, humility, and initiating good. So when you start thinking about conflict resolution, one of the things you got to think about is humility. Am I willing to accept that I was wrong? Am I willing to pick up the part of this that's my fault? Am I willing to not try to make this a I win, you lose, I'm right, you're wrong? But humility. And the second part is, what happens when a person behaves according to their capacity for imperfection? I think that's the biggest thing. I got to do a Zoom call with a group of elders, and they were asking about marriage difficulties. And I said, I think that basically we come into marriage with a set of expectations, and when expectation doesn't meet reality, people get disgruntled. And he was asking about, how you prevent that or predict it. And I'm not sure you can, because people in the romance stage don't see the red flags and things that you find endearing about people after you spent 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with them for 6 months. You find irritating about them. And so, but the thing is, you've made a promise, and that promise is to endure. Endurance is not being able to do what you do and it doesn't hurt. Endurance is being able to do what you do and it's starting to hurt, where it's inconvenient, where it's hard. And so humility, endurance, and then initiating good. Can I do something personally to fix a situation where there's a difficulty or a hurt or a conflict? And I think a lot of times we camp out and wait on the other person to have a change of heart. But it's the impetus or the onus is on us to initiate good. So that's kind of a review of 1 Corinthians 13. And then I want to talk about just some practical stuff. Probably one of the most famous therapists in America is a guy named John Gottman, Gottman. And most of the stuff that he's written, we'll review the other stuff that he's written. So you could probably pick up any Gottman book and get caught up. I particularly like his first or second book, Why Marriages Succeed or Fail. And what Gottman focused on when he was doing his study was couples' interactions, and particularly two sides of interaction. One was bids for affection, and the other was how they behave in conflict. And so we're going to stretch this out for a couple of sessions, but just so you don't get lost in the note-taking, there's 4 things you want to look out for, or 4 things you want to be aware of when you're talking about dealing with conflict. And it's the presence or the absence of contempt. The presence or absence of defensiveness, the presence or absence of negative thinking, and then the presence or absence of stonewalling. And that means if I make a repair attempt, typically you turn toward me, but oftentimes people turn away or they turn against. And he'll do the same thing with bids for affection. I can offer you a bid for affection. You can turn toward me, you can turn away from me, or you can turn against me. And so we're going to analyze that just a little bit. And the first one we want to talk about is this thing called contempt. Now, when I say the word contempt, what comes to your mind? It's It's a negative. Okay, what else? Contempt of court. Now, what does contempt of court mean? The judge has told you or asked you to do something, and you behaved in such a way that he feels like you've disrespected the court. I did my practicum at Cedar Lodge every Thursday for 18 weeks from noon to midnight. If you've ended up at Cedar Lodge on Tater Tot night, something is wrong in your universe, is what they used to say to introduce the program. And while we were there, one of the guys that was in Cedar Lodge for substance use disorder said that he was in court, and the judge said, 90 days, hit the gavel. The guy said, turned to his lawyer and said, I can do 90 days standing on my head. Judge said, 180 days. I want you to be on your feet, son. He gave him contempt of court because he spoke out loud in his courtroom. And my brother was trying a case. Young lawyer went to the back, cut the lights off. Said, and judge, I'm going to shed light on this case. The judge said, bailiff, take him to the jail. Nobody touches the light switches in my courtroom. Son, you're in contempt. So contempt of court is I've treated you in a way that is disrespectable or dishonorable. What else comes to your mind when you hear contempt? Dislike. And what else did you say? Almost hatred. So the thing about contempt is it can be real. You're feeding that to me, or I can perceive it. Now think about if you didn't grow up in a Southern culture and somebody doesn't say yes sir or yes ma'am to you. Some people view that as contempt. Some words that you say to people. I was on the West Coast jogging on the beach, and out of the surf came these two guys in diving suits with snorkel mask and blonde hair, and they had obviously been spearfishing. And I said, you boys do any good? And they tilted their heads like Cocker Spaniels because they knew I was speaking English. They just didn't know what English I was speaking. Did you have any success spearfishing? Oh, man, yeah, we killed a couple of cool reddies and some snappers. But when I called them boys and asked them, did they do any good? That like to not have been, I nearly had to whip two surfer dudes. But they viewed it as contempt because they called them boys. So it's almost a hatred and it's negative. Anything else comes to your mind with contempt? So let's talk about that dynamic. We're in the backyard and we're throwing a baseball. And you throw the baseball to me and it hits my hand and it hurts. And it feels like you threw it too hard. How do I send that message back to you? Maybe. Anybody shake their hand? Or what do? You load that cannon up, son. And you tow that rubber and you decide. And then it becomes like Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck. I've got a gun, I've got a rifle, I've got a cannon, I've got a rocket launcher, I got a nuclear weapon, and then all of a sudden the window's broke. Humans tend to exchange emotional heat. And so I never catch that ball and go, hey, that was a little hard, let's throw it softer. It's, oh, and we gun it back down. And sometimes you throw the ball and it hurts my hand, and it has nothing to do with how you threw it. I caught it here instead of the pocket. And I register contempt, but it's where I caught it, not necessarily how you intended it. So it can be real or perceived. Now, contempt basically is going to fall into a couple of rules of engagement. Let's look at one. This is kind of one of those extrapolations of Scripture. Judges chapter 12. Classic miscommunication. Judges chapter 12, verse 1. And the Ephraimite forces were called out, and they crossed over to Zaphon, and they said to Jephthah, why did you go fight the Ammonites without calling us to go with you? We're going to burn your house down over your head. Okay, now, do you get a mixed message here? Hey, we're your buddies. Why didn't you ask us to go with you? And we're such good buddies, since you didn't invite us to the party, we're going to burn your place down. Is anybody confused as I am about that? Are these people my friends? Maybe they're in-laws, maybe. But they're not. And then Jephthah responded, I and my people were engaged in a great struggle with the Ammonites. And although I called you, you didn't save me out of their hands. And when I saw that you wouldn't help, I took my life in my own hands. I crossed over to fight the Ammonites, and the Lord gave me the victory over them. Now why have you come up to fight me? Hey, you didn't invite us. I invited you, and you ignored me, so I decided to do this. Do you see how this conversation starts out antagonistically? John Gottman calls that a harsh startup. Hey, look, we understand you had a battle. We really wish we could have gone with you. Hey, we got your six. We backed the blue. I'll come and help you. All kind of things you can say is, why didn't you invite me? I'm going to burn your house down. Well, I did invite you, and since you ignored me, I handle business on my own. Neither one of these guys is doing appropriate communication. But now here's the fun part of this, and I really can't explain all that there is to it, but I like to use it as a jumping off spot. Jephthah then called together the men of Gilead, and they fought against Ephraim. This little miscommunication thing that says, hey, we're your buddies, but we're not, and I asked you to help me, you didn't? Well, if you want to fight, let's do it. So they call together these guys, and they get in a fight. And the Gileadites struck down the men of Ephraim because the Ephraimites had said, you Gileadites are renegades from Ephraim and Manasseh. I'm not sure what that means. But if you want to trash talk an Old Testament Hebrew, there you have it. Them's fighting words. What does it say in the King James Version? You're a fugitive of Ephraim and Manasseh. Well, apparently that'll make a Hebrew hot, and he's ready to throw hands. So they go into this fight, and they're doing this because of this insult. The Gileadites captured the fords of the Jordan that led to Ephraim, and whenever a survivor of Ephraim said, let me cross over, the men of Gilead would reply, are you an Ephraimite? And he replied, no. They said, okay, say Shibboleth. But if he said Sibboleth, because he could not pronounce the word correctly, they seized him and killed him at the fords of the Jordan, and 42,000 Ephraimites were killed at that time. What's that? How about that H? That's a powerful dude right there, isn't it? You know, hey, go get me one of those. Well, you want a pop? Dead man. He's a Yankee. You want a soda? No, I want a Coke. What kind of Coke? A Pepsi, a Mountain Dew, or whatever, right? There's culture. This may be a southern Israel thing, a northern Israel thing. They were saying the same thing, but it's not what they said, but how they said it. That's the measure of contempt. You can say something to somebody, and although the intention is this, your delivery may be toxic or may be contemptuous. And if I perceive it as contemptuous, it's going to sting when it hits my glove. Now, I think sometimes I have to put my big boy britches on and realize that everything's not an insult, and I'm just not looking for a reason to fight. Sound like these guys were looking for reasons to fight. As Lonnie Beth got to be, a little bit older, I liked it that the kids call me Lonnie, and the people in my youth group call me Jones, and not Mr. Lonnie, and not Mr. Jones, and not Pastor Lonnie, or whatever that is. I like the fact that they did that. Well, it created a familiarity with Lonnie Beth that sometimes was borderline on disrespectful. So we said, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, no, sir, is not open to interpretation. Anything other than that, I get to decide whether it's disrespectful or not. So if you want to make sure what it sounds like, this is what you do. And that kind of solved the ambiguity of all that. Because, sometimes a young person can speak to you in their vernacular, and they think they're being familial, and it sounds really disrespectful, right? So it's not what you say, but how you say it is super, super important. It basically involves two standard rules. One is, when I'm unhappy about something, I want to make a request to have my needs met. But I want it to be a positive request to have my needs met. I want a complaint to be about the problem. I do not want the complaint to be a criticism. Because a complaint talks about the problem, the criticism talks about the person. I have a friend, kind of strange guy, was a magician, was always doing weird stuff, sent me one time a book, a picture of a book, and it said, The pop-up book of phobias. What could go wrong with this? I need to make that book. Well, I'm self-employed, and I like to deer hunt. Does anybody see any potential problems there? My boss is a sucker for half a day off. I'm going to be a little late today. He never asks why. We just go deer hunting. It's really interesting. Because of the weird time change, I can hunt in the morning for a couple of hours, go to the office, see a few clients, hunt a couple of hours in the evening, and be home by 6 o'clock. But I leave the house before dark. I come home after dark. My wife can say, "You're never home." Or she can say, "I wished we spent more time together." Are we talking about the same thing? Yeah. One could be contemptuous, and the other is an invitation to spend more time together. So once you figure out, hey, there's something I need to correct, or I need to fix, or I need to straighten out, learning it's not what you say, but how you say it. And you want your messages to not be contemptuous, because the husband is very sensitive to that. By the way, guys, ladies talk about things that they think should be different because they think they're important enough to make better. That's it. Women don't invest their time and energy in things they don't think are valuable. So when your wife says, "This is not working for me," or "I wish this were different, I wish this were better," it's because she sees it as valuable and wants it to be fixed. When a guy hears you say that, we feel like we've failed and we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater. And I don't know why we're sensitive little babies like that, but we are. Okay? We want you to give us a gold star on everything we do. We're the best, and we're the strongest, and we're the mightiest. Okay? But if you go, the house wasn't dusted after I was gone for 9 days. Well, I can't do everything. I got a job too, No. It's just she thought the house looked good but wished it had been dusted. That's all she said. That's not what most of us heard, right? And so what you say and how you say it is very, very important, because it sets up a dynamic that we'll talk about later. But it's not just what you say and how you say it. Look at Matthew chapter 5. Verse 21. Jesus is confronting internals versus externals. He's talking to the Pharisees about the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law. He does something interesting with this discussion. Verse 21, "You've heard it said to the people long ago, 'You shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be in danger of the judgment.' But I tell you, anyone who is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of judgment. And anyone who says to his brother, 'Rakah,' is answerable to the Sanhedrin, and anyone who says 'You fool' will be in danger of hell fire." Now, if you bring your gift to the offering, if you are offering your gift at the altar and you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift in front of the altar and go and reconcile with your brother, and then bring your gift. So a couple of rules of engagement here. One is that if you're coming with your gift before the altar, you're coming to worship, you recognize you've got unfinished business with somebody, it's on you to go fix the unfinished business. It doesn't mean that your brother has a legitimate cause. It doesn't mean he's reasonable. It doesn't even mean he's rational. You recognize I've got unfinished business. I initiate that good. Okay, that's the secondary principle here. But what he talks about is, hey, what's the difference in murder and hate? What's the difference in murder and hate? Hate's an action, hate's an attitude, murder is an action, right? We typically don't have a lot of problem in the churches with people killing people. I guess there's some isolated places. In fact, a lot of people don't get killed in church, period. And maybe there's some churches in Paint Rock Valley that handle the danger noodles, but I'm not saying that can happen. But as far as me walking into a group of people and going, "Today we're going to do a seminar about y'all not killing each other," that just doesn't happen. I got asked to drive 3 hours to a church in Tennessee, speak for 30 minutes, drive 3 hours back in their summer series. Their topic was, "Thou shalt not murder." I said, hard pass. I don't think that's something your brethren need to be encouraged about. We're really not hardwired to kill each other. Read Dave Grossman's book on killing, or Colonel Grossman's book on combat, and we're really not that good at it, and we don't enjoy it, and most people can't do it, most people won't do it. But have you ever hated anybody? most of us here never even thought about going out here and beating somebody with a ball bat or shooting them with a pistol or stabbing them with a knife. But how many people have you looked at contemptuously and called them a fool or an idiot or liberal or fag or queer or some kind of ethnic slur? One of those people. Yeah, you may have never put your hands on anybody in violence. What is that thought process? My dad had a big hang-up on the word fool. He said, you can't call each other fools. I'd do stuff for my brother to call me a fool, get him in trouble. It was awesome. I don't think the big prohibition here is the word fool. I really don't think there's a big prohibition against the Aramaic word rekah. Rekah means empty-headed one. I did a meeting at Alder Springs, which is down the road here just a little bit, and talked about that rekah was Aramaic for empty-headed one. And there's a little used car lot, and on their water tower, guess what was painted? Rekah Motors. Don't buy a car from those people. I'm just telling you right now. Well, I really don't think Jesus was worried about the specific word fool or the specific word rekah. I think he's talking about the attitude where I look at somebody who's created in the image of God that he came to die for, and I could call them a fool or an idiot or a dweeb or a dork or a loser or insert your racial slur or any other demeaning title. So it's not just what you say, but how you say it, and it's not what you say, but why you say it. And when Paul gives the short list of the fruits of the Spirit in Ephesians, the long list in Galatians, the short list in Ephesians is good, right, and true. The fruit of the Spirit is in all goodness, righteousness, and truth. So when I'm in a conflict and I'm about to say something, not what I say, but how I say it, and not what I say, but why I say it. Is this statement engendered to talk about my needs or talk about your faults? Is this statement engendered to draw us closer together or push us further apart? Now, what happens when somebody deals out contempt, how do we respond to contempt? Anger? How else? Retaliation? So it starts this negative cycle. And typically when we feel contemptuous or somebody attacks us, what's the response to being attacked? I'm going to be defensive. Now, once I start defending my actions, am I trying to solve a problem or am I trying to win a contest? Now, if I try to win a contest, it becomes a zero-sum game. I'm right, you're wrong. I win, you lose. I'm happy, you're sad. And if it becomes a zero-sum contest, my default operating system is then selfishness. And how do we measure trust in a relationship? Oh, it's a function of selfishness. So we're trying to solve a problem. Jackie's unhappy about something, and instead of me trying to meet her needs, I got to prove I wasn't wrong. And I respond with defensiveness. Now, if you want to figure out, hey, is my response defensive or not, look for three things: minimization, denial, and blame. Minimization is it's not as big a deal as you're making it out to be. Denial, I didn't do it. Deny. Who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes? Is what one guy said on a call we went to. And then blame is, well, the only reason I did what I did is because you did what you did. Or your mother did this, or they did that, or whatever. And if you're dealing in a conflict and you're doing minimization, denial, and blame, you're not taking ownership, you're not taking accountability, you're not trying to solve the problem, you're trying to get out of trouble. Compare Saul's reaction to not utterly destroying the Amalekites. Samuel walks up to Saul and says, "Why have you disobeyed the Lord?" And what does Saul say? Remember that story? Well, first he said, "I have obeyed the Lord." No, you didn't. I have obeyed the Lord. Well, I hear cattle and I hear sheep. Then what does he say? Well, I only kept the best one. I'm going to sacrifice these things. You don't understand my motives. So we've got denial. now we've got minimization, and then you weren't here and the people demanded blame. Now, take a scenario where a prophet walks up to David and says, you're the man. You could add any woman in Israel, and you took the one sheep that belonged to Uriah the Hittite. And what does David say? He wrote Psalm 51. Create in me a clean heart, O God. I've sinned against God. If you wanted sacrifices, I'd give you 1,000. But what God wants is a broken and a contrite heart. In one scenario, you get minimization, denial, and blame. In the other scenario, you have this situation where a guy takes full ownership for what he said. So my wife's unhappy about something. I need to figure out what it is and see if there's a way I can fix it. But if I respond with defensiveness because I think she's being contemptuous, then we're starting that cascade into negativity. You ever dealt with anybody who wouldn't take ownership for their mistakes? Anybody here any coach athletics? Try to tell somebody what to do, and they, yeah, coach, but well, this is the way I do. And you enjoy coaching those students? People who are uncoachable are very unpleasant, okay? And people who always have an excuse for why they did what they did are irritating to be around. And so I'm dealing with my spouse, and she wants this to be different, and instead of listening to her, I feel like she's attacked me, so I'm defending my position. Minimization, denial, and blame. Well, yeah, I only did this because you did that, or you didn't let me do this. Now, what happens when contempt moves into defensiveness? Are you moving toward or away from a solution? Are you dwelling in the present, or you start dwelling in the past? Are you getting closer or further apart? Hey, a really cool thing you could do is get you 2 chess pieces, get you the little things out of Monopoly, get the top hat and the little car, or the little Scotty dog, or whatever it is, and set them on your table. And then this is my solution. And you say something, and I move my little thing toward the solution. And I say something, you move the marker toward the solution. And then I bring up your mother, and you move it away from the solution. Oh, and you could do that graphically on a table, and everything that's not walking toward a solution, you just call it out on a board game. It would change the dynamic of your conversation. You could do it in the hallway. You could stand in the hallway and put a soup can over there. Hey, listen, I think that you're being late for supper disrupts the family dynamic. Toward the soup can. Well, you were late the other night, but not moving toward the thing. And everything you say that doesn't move you toward a solution, you either don't say or you ignore. Keep people on track. It's a super easy way to decide, am I being defensive, and am I responding to what I think was contempt? And if you think somebody's being contemptuous, reword it. Okay, what I think you're saying is you wish that I would, da-da. Oh, you call me sloppy. You call me, I'll never come home. Quit superimposing what they, find out what they meant. Now you may say, are you telling me that you think I ignore you? Yeah, I feel ignored. Oh. Can I argue with the fact that she feels ignored? I can. I'm an idiot if I do. But if she feels ignored, then it's okay, you feel ignored when I how can I fix it? You see us moving toward a solution? But if it's contempt, and that contempt runs me into defensiveness, and I start trying to prove I'm right, you're wrong, I win, you lose, in order to maintain the energy to fight like that, I've got to view you differently. And that's when we get into the idea of negativity. Buhlman calls it negative sentiment override. It's where I decide to describe you in a certain way that only allows my negative sentiments to be at the top. If you take a young man and you train him as a special forces operator and you send him overseas, you'll send him overseas to kill skinnies, Sammies, Krauts, Gooks, whatever. Why? Because you don't send him over there to kill brothers, uncles, cousins, dads, and fathers. It's hard to kill brothers, uncles, dads, cousins, and fathers. But I can kill this name. I can kill this thing. I can kill this nickname. You get that? So when I'm arguing with you and I feel like you've treated me with contempt and I'm being defensive, in order to maintain the energy to fight, I can't think of you as my girlfriend or my lover or the mother of the children. You're the witch, the nag. She always, she never, every time. So I begin to paint you with this negative picture because I've got to have the ability to view you differently to fight you. And so contempt leads to defensiveness, and defensiveness leads to negativity, and it's where we begin to paint the story of us with regret and disappointment and contempt and dissatisfaction rather than the good things. And oftentimes we camp out in that negative mindset just because of our conflict style. Now, Gottman says he can sit in a room with a couple, listen to them interact over a problem, and predict divorce in 10 minutes with 95% accuracy. This may be the most important discussion I ever have with couples who come to me for counseling if it's mid to moderate level problems. Because I don't care what you're arguing about. Now, couples love to come and tell on each other. I am not the principal. I'm not your dad. I'm not her dad. I'm not going to spank either one of you. Seen a couple of spouses I'd like to whip, but I'm not going to spank anybody. So you coming in and vomiting all their past sins to me is superfluous and irrelevant. And honestly, I don't care. I want to know how you act when they offend your sensibilities. But you'll be surprised the couples who want to come in and have their turn, have their day in court, want to list all the bad things. That doesn't do any good. It opens up old wounds. It causes people to yeah, well, you did that because I did this. And it's a nightmare. And it's not therapy, by the way. You're bringing somebody into the principal's office and telling on them. I want to know how you treat each other when you feel like you've been treated unfairly. And if you treat them with contempt and negativity and defensiveness, at some point somebody says, I'm not doing this anymore, and they stonewall. They disengage. They turn away. If you come into the office and one person says, I'm just tired, I've had it, I don't think they can hurt me anymore, and I don't think they can make me happy anymore, I'm just numb. That is a crisis situation for that marriage, because a minot can dig you out of that hole because somebody has used all the energy they can possibly use and they've decided to quit. If you're really, really, really passionate and mad at each other, I can work with that. But if one of you goes numb, divorce is almost imminent. You might as well say that you've replaced logical thinking with this emotional numbness. And in order to deal with intimacy, conflict, and withdrawal, in order to get out of withdrawal back to intimacy, you've got to have the energy to go back through some of the conflict and change your conflict style, change the way you talk to each other, or even change the way you listen to each other. So before the second bell gets me, go to the book of Ephesians. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29. This would be your second chart of rules of engagement. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit, with whom you are sealed for the day of redemption. Get rid of bitterness, rage, anger, brawling, slander, along with all kinds of malice. And I think you could substitute contempt for the word malice. Be kind, compassionate to one another, forgiving one another, just as God in Christ forgave you. So there's your second set of rules of engagement for dealing with conflict. 1 Corinthians 12 and then Ephesians 4, based in the idea of contempt, negativity, defensiveness, and stonewalling. Any questions or comments? I heard two bells. I may have hallucinated them, but I think I heard them, so we're gone. Thank you, guys.